Hello, everyone. Welcome to the stream for March of Coffee and Real Estate. The live chat will be starting here in about 15 minutes. As always, we're going to be streaming on Facebook, YouTube, LinkedIn, Twitter, so feel free to check it out there. I will only be able to see or respond, actually. Obviously, verbally I can respond, but it's going to be, I think YouTube and Facebook are the only ones where there's sort of a direct interaction between us in terms of just comments that you're typing. So just keep that in mind, and it requires that I have to have a couple of different windows open as we go. If you've got any questions right up front that you want to talk about that maybe aren't even real estate related, it's been an interesting month. We're going to have some cool data, I think, to discuss when we kick off the show for realsies. For right now, though, let me just verify that we are live in all my favorite places. Let me just verify. And we are live on YouTube. Let me check LinkedIn. LinkedIn's always, oh wow. Looks like LinkedIn has finally, perfect. LinkedIn is working. Let's see how it looks on X. Man, I tell you, X is always the one that doesn't seem to quite get it. Let's see here. There it is. So we are there. Yeah. So I can see it, but you can only see it really on my profile page. So I'm going to go ahead and pin that. But for whatever reason, direct links that get shared out don't seem to work too well. So anyway. All right, we're all squared away there. That is good news. It looks like we're also good up on Facebook. So if you guys have, there is so much that we could potentially talk about. We've had an election, or we had our March voting, where it looks like Proposition 1 has passed by just the thinnest of margins. And that sort of plays into some things we can talk about later relating to other things that are going to get voted on in November of this year. We can talk about what I've been seeing in terms of sort of the mindset of people who've been talking to me about getting their homes sold, because I think that's interesting to talk about. Because a lot of the tax-related things, a lot of the political things that are making their way through the pipeline here in California have been motivators for people that I've been talking to. It continues to be true that a minority of people that I help sell their home, or that talk to me about selling their home, a minority of those people are now staying in California. And that's been true for a few years, but it used to be the other way around. It used to be, if you were selling your home in California, frequently I had people buying in the same city. I'd help someone sell a home in San Jose and buy a home in San Jose. Now, or they'd be moving somewhere else, maybe somewhere closer to family in California, or just somewhere else they liked in California. Now I'm finding that they're not. They're moving out of state. Idaho, Nevada, Arizona, Utah, Texas, Florida. All of those are on the sort of the hit parade of states that get mentioned by folks. So if anyone has comments about that, I wouldn't mind hearing it. It looks like we've already got a few people watching. Welcome. Thanks for joining in the early pre-show stage. We're about 10 minutes away from kicking off the show for realsies. But happy to field any questions. If you want to throw up a question in the comments, feel free to do that. If I do have this set up right, we will also see comments pop up on the screen there. So for folks who obviously can't see that stuff, because only I can see that stuff, that'll show up there for you to see as well. Now, what I'd love to find out from you guys, and this is I'd love for you to bring it up during the show. I mean, I frequently get folks who follow up with me post-show, maybe folks who consume it later in the week or we were really far into the week. I'll typically get those questions via email or through the website. But I'd love to answer those here just so that more people benefit from the discussion, right? It's knowledge is power. And just the more we're able to share information out with people, I think people make better decisions under those circumstances. It looks like we got 6 folks watching the stream at the moment. Thanks for spending your Saturday morning with me. I hope you have great plans, and I hope you have your favorite cup of coffee with you, because that's what we're going to be about today. We're going to be about coffee and real estate. I've got sort of my own little, for those of you who are new, I'm not, if you heard about my routine, I think you'd probably call me a coffee snob in terms of like grinding my own beans and doing all the espresso things. But I'm not a big fan of coffee straight, so I'm more of a mocha guy. But I have to keep it keto, so I do a bunch of weird stuff to it to keep it from having sugar in it or any of these other things that I'm not supposed to have. So I don't know how many other people are doing the keto thing, but it took me a long time to come up with a sort of a recipe. And the only thing I change in my recipe is the beans for the coffee. And I've pretty much settled on my favorite. I can't even remember which one it is. But anyway, I've got a nice handy tumbler here with some coffee in it for us to enjoy during the show. I don't want to do any spoilers, but Gilroy continues to be sort of one of the outlier communities with just, and by outlier, I mean just doing things differently than every other place, right? Whether we're talking about the county or San Jose or Morgan Hill or Los Gatos or anywhere else, Gilroy it just goes this sort of takes its own path in terms of what the market's doing. People who are looking to sell there are far more calibrated to what the real numbers are. For the most part, we've had a few months where that hasn't been true, but again, in terms of their expectations for what their home should sell for compared to last year, definitely interesting compared to what other communities are seeing, and we'll talk about that in the numbers as well. But I want to thank everybody. Wow, we've got a pretty good number of folks. It looks like we got 6 folks currently in. So again, feel free to ask any questions now if you want to do any pre-show chit-chat. It doesn't even have to be real estate related in the pre-show part. Whatever you want to chat about is fine. But I'm happy to answer your questions, whatever they may be. And again, for those of you out there watching, if you prefer to watch, if you're watching on Facebook and you prefer YouTube, it's also streaming to YouTube. We currently stream to Facebook, YouTube, LinkedIn, Twitter. I think that's it. There was a short period of time there where I also streamed to Twitch, but that just turned into a car wreck of inappropriate comments, frankly. So I decided to stick with the more serious folks on the other platforms. We're about 5 minutes away from starting the show for real. I do appreciate you coming and spending some time with me this morning. In terms of activity coming up, I mean, just sort of anecdotally what I'm seeing on the ground, definitely a lot more activity from folks asking about the value of their home, folks inquiring about whether or not they want to sell, those types of things, and more serious, let's sell my house type of inquiries. I've got at least 4 right now where we're in the lead up stages to putting homes on the market. And that's pretty typical for this time of year if it's going to happen, right? If you want to put your home on the market, typically you're going to start wanting to have those conversations as early as possible to prepare for the peak seasons, which tends to be, if you look at the numbers, May, June, a lot of people look specifically at June and say, well, that's when you really want to get your home sold. Well, no, you don't. People don't realize the number of homes sold in June does not represent the actual month it's sold. It represents the month escrow closed, but it doesn't represent the month the offer was accepted. So the activity that indicated that boost in June or May or whenever, if it's the number of homes sold went up, you need to look 30 to 45 days before that for when those offers came in. If you are, and what's really funny is so many agents don't pay attention to that, right? So they go on the market right in that month that's supposed to be the peak without realizing the buyers showed up 30 days ago, right? That's how those numbers work, right? If you show me how many homes sold in the month of March, you're not telling me that those homes had an accepted offer in March. Maybe one of those two is, maybe someone did a all cash offer and it was a 2-week escrow. Not real likely. That's a super small number of times that happens per year. But it's you got to know what the details mean, right? You got to understand what those numbers mean when you're out there trying to figure out the best time to get your home sold. And I had an interesting conversation with someone yesterday. There was someone who owns a home in Cupertino, my old stomping grounds. Grew up in the Cupertino area. And they're looking at listing a home that's in a beautiful area, a gated community that's pretty awesome. I mean, I've back when I was in high school, I actually dated a girl who lived in this community. I don't know why I'm mentioning that, but anyway, the interesting thing there was just sort of understanding, how the market's currently working, and they were asking questions like, well, if I want to sell it myself, and I said, absolutely. And in today's market, you will be able to sell it yourself, but it's not a question of if you can sell it. It's a question of how much you can sell it for, right? More eyeballs equals a higher probability of making more money. And that's where a real estate agent's value comes in, is being able to bring the eyeballs. And some of us are better at it than others. I like to think of myself as really good at it. I do a lot of things most agents don't because it costs more money on the front end, but it ends up being a pretty good payoff in terms of what you end up seeing in terms of offers. We're about 3 minutes away from kicking off the show officially. If you've got any pre-show style questions, happy to answer them. But it looks like we're up and running on everything, which is great. I know a few months back we had all kinds of crazy technical problems with the stream breaking. But it looks like, I always hate to bring it up because I might jinx it, but I think we're good. So today what we've got on the hit parade is the usual market review. We'll cover all of February's numbers. And if we want, we can also look at just some sort of instant right now, what's happened over the last 7-day numbers for some communities if we feel like that's worth our time. One interesting thing is the number of homes that have price reductions has been a piece of data I've been covering lately because I think it has been super important. What's interesting is right now in the last 7 days in Morgan Hill, for instance, we've had the same number of homes with price increases as price decreases. So now the market's to the point where we're actually seeing homes getting prices increased while they're out there getting marketed, which is pretty stunning given the turnaround, right? It hasn't been that long since it was really focused on price reductions. We'll get a feeling for where things are going. Obviously, the more inventory you get versus the number of buyers you have. If you have too much inventory, you're going to start to see people dropping their prices to try and get the attention of buyers. But we're not there yet in Morgan Hill. But we could be. We could be in a lot of these communities in terms of how many homes we're listing versus how many are selling. We're going to cover those numbers. But just interesting things to keep in mind. 1 minute till we get started, folks. I'm going to go ahead and victimize you with my ugly mug. Welcome. We're almost there. We're about 30 seconds away from starting. I always like to wait till the actual minute because I get a lot of folks who sort of show up right at the time it's supposed to start. I hope you all have a great weekend planned. This weekend's likely to be pretty busy. This afternoon, I've got quite a few things to do. Got a lot of folks out there looking to... What's interesting is this weekend, I have more conversations happening with people who are talking about selling than I do with buying, which is also an interesting thing that's changed over the last month or so. Okay, here we are. It is 10 a.m. That means it is time to start the March 2024 edition of the Coffee and Real Estate Live Chat. My name is Robert Whitelaw. I'm a licensed real estate broker right here in Silicon Valley. I've been serving this area since 1988, so I've been doing this a super long time. And I like to take a morning out once a month on the third Saturday of every month where we talk about the latest real estate data that affects our local markets. And to do that, we start at the top. We look at county numbers for Santa Clara County, and then we just sort of drill down, start off with San Jose, and then we go down to Morgan Hill, and then from there to Gilroy, just sort of going to smaller markets. And I think that's a great way to do it, right? Obviously, the Santa Clara County numbers are going to be the highest sample size, so more reliable data to look at things. But we're going to take a look at all of this and get a feeling for where we're at So let's go ahead and do that. Let's go ahead and do our thing. Let me go ahead and put my face in the upper right corner just because, or maybe just get rid of my face altogether. All right, so obviously where we start is where we always start, with the total number of homes on the market. And this simply represents the inventory number, right? If you are looking to get your home sold, this represents your competition. How many homes out there are in competition for the attention of buyers? If you're a buyer, it's how many homes did you have to choose from? And as we check this out, we're looking at what was the change. This is the year-over-year change. So this represents February of 2023 versus February of 2024. And we can see that for Santa Clara County overall, we've got a 6% increase in the overall inventory. We have 1,055 homes on the market. Last year, we had 999. And of course, as we go, if you have any questions about any of this data, feel free to ask in the chat. I am poking my head over there every now and again to make sure I don't miss someone's question, but feel free to ask any questions there if you have them. In San Jose, we saw a 1% increase from last year, so really flat, right? San Jose, super flat in terms of overall inventory. 454 last year, 458 this year, so really just flat. Morgan Hill, same kind of thing, 2% down. We have one home fewer this year than last year. It was 46 last year, 45 this year. Gilroy is one of the few places that saw a pretty substantial drop in inventory. 67 last year, 46 this year. So it's kind of interesting to see where these numbers are. And if we look at what happened with homes sold, it's going to be interesting to see that despite what we're going to see for homes sold numbers compared to last year, we saw such a dramatic drop in the overall inventory for Gilroy. So let's go ahead and jump into the next set of data. What we're going to look at next is new listings. Now, these are the number of homes that went on the market. So in other words, someone who was living in a house decided, I want to sell my house, and the home went on the market in that month, right? So in the month of February, in Santa Clara County, we saw a 38% jump from the same time last year. That's pretty substantial, right? And remember, the reason we do year over year is we're trying to correct for seasonal influences, right? It doesn't make any sense to compare a June to a November, right? Heart of winter, no one wants to sell their house, versus when everybody's thinking about moving, right? The weather's getting nice, school's stopping, and there's going to be a nice summer session for you to potentially move. So we like to keep it February to February. So 896 homes were listed last year, 1,240 this year in Santa Clara County overall, again for a 38% increase, which is pretty dramatic. San Jose, we saw a 41% increase, 425 last year, 599 this year. Morgan Hill, we saw a 28% jump from 39 last year to 50 this year. And in Gilroy, we saw a jump to the same number. So 50 again in Gilroy, with a 32% jump from 38 last year to 50 this year. So very similar performances in terms of how many sellers decided to go on the market, right? And some of this is figuring out mindset and in different communities and the enthusiasm for potentially putting your home on the market. Let's go ahead and take a look at homes sold. Or wait, did we just look at homes sold? Jeez, my brain sort of fell out there for a second. So homes sold is our next number. We were just looking at total number of homes listed. If I misspoke a minute ago and referred to that as homes sold, I apologize. 25% increase in the total number of homes sold, which makes a lot of sense given the increases in inventory or the increase in listings. And we'll see here in a minute homes sold versus homes listing, because I think that's an interesting number to know. 686 homes sold in Santa Clara County overall for a 25% increase. San Jose saw a 25% increase as well, from 310 last year to 389 this year. Morgan Hill saw a 20% increase, 20 last year, 24 this year. And Gilroy saw no change at all. 27 homes sold last year, and 27 homes sold this year. So let's take a step back for a second. Given these numbers of how many homes were listed versus how many homes were sold, did we add homes to the inventory or did we subtract homes from the inventory? Well, we sold 554 fewer homes than we listed in Santa Clara County. So we added 554 homes to the inventory. In San Jose, we added 210 homes. In Morgan Hill, we added 26 homes. And in Gilroy, we added 23 homes. So across the board, we net increased the inventory moving forward in those communities. So I think that's something worth paying attention to. You really know markets are getting hotter when you're selling homes as fast as you're listing them, which happens. We've had several months in the past year when we tend to see that. That tends to be in the May-June timeframe. But we've also had Februaries where we had some pretty amazing numbers in terms of selling off just about everything we listed. All right, next, let's take a look at months of inventory. Now, months of inventory is just sort of an idea to understand how much of a backlog of homes are there, right? Now, months of inventory means if we were to freeze the total number of homes that sold in the month of February, and the total number of homes that were in the total inventory and the total number of homes sold, how long would it take for the total number of homes sold to eat away at the inventory, right? The national average or the national balance number, in other words, home buyers and sellers are sort of in balance, is considered to be about 4.5, 5 months. And we are nowhere near that number, and we haven't been. So the lower the number is, the more you would tend to think we are in a seller's market, because this indicates dramatic low inventory, and low inventory tends to indicate there'll be higher demand because there's less of it, right? In Santa Clara County, we saw a 17% drop. It was 1.8 months a year ago, 1.5 months this year. San Jose, a 20% drop at 1.5 months last year, 1.2 months this year. And in Morgan Hill, it was a 17% drop, 2.3 months last year, 1.9 months this year. And in Gilroy, down 32%, 2.5 months last year, 1.7 months this year. So what's interesting there is we now actually have lower months of inventory in Gilroy than we do in Morgan Hill. So that indicates sort of the interesting demand in the Gilroy marketplace. Still checking out my comment section here. If anybody has any questions, feel free to ask them. I can see we've got several folks still watching the stream. Welcome. If you're brand new, I see the number kind of went up a little bit by a couple of digits there. So feel free to ask any questions. As we're going through here, I'm happy to stop and review numbers as we're going through. If you feel like there's something worth expanding on, I am happy to do that for you. Next, let's talk about the total number of homes pending or contingent. Now, just to give you, this sort of ties into what I was talking about in the pre-show about how when you see that the number of homes that sold in a month doesn't represent the month they actually sold, that represents the month they closed escrow. The time when the offer was made that was accepted on that home was probably 30 to 45 days before that. So this is a measure of the total number of accepted offers in the month of February. Why do we care? Because we want to see if this is something that's going to be a crystal ball number for us on how many homes sold. And by keeping track of this number, it also lets us kind of keep our finger on the pulse of how many homes are falling through. Sometimes we'll see offers accepted at the number of, say, in the county, 889. But then in the next month, we'll see far fewer than that. And we can go back and look a little bit more deeply into those numbers and see, yeah, you know what? A lot of these escrows fell through. And then we can try to figure out what was causing that, and understanding what challenges are being faced for escrows and whether or not they close, I think is important, particularly for buyers and sellers to know, because you want to avoid those things. So it's also hopefully something that your real estate agent is tracking as well. All right, so let's go ahead and dive in. 9% increase in the same time last year, 818 in Santa Clara County, 889 this year. So an increase of the total number of accepted offers. In San Jose, California, that number went up 13%, 411 last year, 464 this year. Down 5% in Morgan Hill, 37 last year, 35 this year. Because of the small sample size of Morgan Hill, I really consider that flat. That's not a warning light for me. It doesn't make me think we need to be worried about a decline of some kind in Morgan Hill. And the same goes really for Gilroy, despite the fact it's an increase. It went up 3%. It was 34 homes last year, 30 homes this year that accepted an offer on their property. Next, let's take a look at our average original list price. So let me explain what this is. This represents what the number was the day the home was listed. So this is a little bit of a peek into the psychology of sellers. How much did you think your home would sell for? What did you list it for when you put it on the market? This isn't what the home was listed for at the time it sold. It's what the home was listed for at the time it was listed. So this was the expectation of sellers. So that's really what this is. It's understanding the expectations of home sellers as we look at these different areas. So this is an interesting one. Santa Clara County. Let me just see here. It's actually 7.5%. So let's make sure that's clear. So Santa Clara County, last year, the average original list price was $2,131,000. This year, it's $1,972,000. That's actually a 7.5% drop. I usually like to also include the point whatever, simply because we're talking about money, and that can have a big impact. So interestingly enough, overall in the county, the average list price is down. So that could indicate one of two things: more of a focus on homes at the lower end. So not necessarily higher priced homes being listed lower, but more emphasis on lower price points. But the fact that the average home is being listed at a lower price is something that shows up in the marketplace and is obviously very important to buyers who are looking for a place to live. In San Jose, that number went up by 0.5%. Last year it was $1,446,000. This year it's $1,454,000. So not a huge change, but not a giant jump. And if you think back to past shows, you might remember that we in some of these communities saw double-digit increases in expectations. There were some communities where over just 1 year, the average list price for a home was up 20%. So there was a period of time when expectations were absolutely off the rails. In Morgan Hill, 11.3% higher than last year. So last year it was $1,455,000. This year it's $1,619,000. And in Gilroy, this number is down 10.4%, biggest decrease. $1,498,000 last year, $1,343,000 this year, which still makes Gilroy one of those very interesting markets. It's drawing people to it because you're getting more house for the money than you'd get, say, in some place like San Jose or Morgan Hill. But we're going to see how these numbers play out. What is the reality of these numbers as we move forward? Now that we've covered original list price, let's go ahead and see what homes we're actually selling for and see what kind of a difference we might see in terms of expectations versus what homes actually sold for. So in Santa Clara County, average sales price was up 10.4%. Last year it was $1,542,000. This year it's $1,702,000. Now, as we look at that, what does that mean? That means that when compared to expectations, because remember, in Santa Clara County, the original list price was $1,972,000. So that means that sellers were taking $270,000 below expectations on average compared to what homes were selling for, right? Next, San Jose, up 12.9%. And remember, these are the actual sales numbers. So this is a firm number. Someone wrote a check, etc. This wasn't what expectations were. Last year, $1,198,000. This year, $1,353,000. But still $100,000 below what we saw as expectations based on what folks were listing their homes for. Morgan Hill, 2.2% increase, which is actually pretty interesting because Morgan Hill has typically had some of the biggest increases in sales price. But I think this makes sense actually for the Morgan Hill market. $1,232,000 last year, $1,259,000 this year. That represents a number that is $359,000 below expectations for Morgan Hill in terms of original list price versus what homes actually sold for. An interesting delta between those two numbers, and also the highest delta in many markets. In all the markets we cover here, it's the highest. Next, in Gilroy, we actually saw, again, one of the weird things that happens in Gilroy where it tends to go its own way, 11.9% drop in average sales price. It was $1,220,000 last year, $1,075,000 this year, $267,000, almost $268,000 off of expectations in terms of what homes were being listed for originally versus what they ended up selling for. And again, another reason why Gilroy is continuing to get greater attention from buyers who are interested in getting the biggest bang for their buck. And just from talking to people who are looking to buy in Gilroy's standpoint, Gilroy seems to be the most south people who work in the heart of Silicon Valley will go. So for instance, I will frequently find people who work at Apple, Google, Facebook, Intel, willing to live in Gilroy and deal with that additional commute so that they can get more house. So that's kind of an interesting thing to note, I think, in terms of understanding the desirability of different communities. Again, if anyone has any questions about any of this data, feel free to ask. I can see we've got a couple more people from just a minute ago currently on the stream. Happy to answer any questions you might have. Next, we're going to take a look at the percent over or under asking price. Now, this 100% means that homes were getting what their list price was, but this is reflective of what the list price was at the time the offer was made, not the original list price. And this is an opportunity to look into the psychology of buyers. So when we were looking at original list price before, we were trying to figure out what was going on in sellers' heads. This is a way to look into buyers' heads and figure out where they were willing to go in terms of how much above the price that the seller was currently asking for a home. Some of these numbers are nuts. So let's go ahead and jump in, particularly when you look at the county numbers. Now, last year in Santa Clara County, homes were selling for 100.9%. So just under 1% above asking price was the average sales price. Today, in February, that number is 6% above asking price, which is crazy, right? I mean, on average, a 6% above asking price in the county overall is just unbelievable for some folks. I've been in situations with buyers who are having to wrestle with this kind of competition. And you're finding this, if you are in an area where homes are sort of average or even a little bit above average, we're starting to see this trend. Now, can you still buy homes for under asking price? Yes. But they tend to need work. I have a property right now where the person who's looking to sell it, it's a home in a beautiful location, Sunnyvale. Actually, a great sort of neighborhood on the rise where all the homes are being remodeled and the street's amazing. It's beautiful. But it's been a rental for the last couple of decades and it is in rough shape. So now the question is, do you remodel and make it all up to date, or do you sell it as is and make it something where someone's going to have to come in and do some remodeling? So that's kind of the conversation that's happening right now. Anyway, San Jose up 5.3%, 106.2% this year versus 100.9 last year. So it was the same as the county numbers last year. But again, even higher than the county on average, 6.2% above asking price, which is crazy. A little bit more rational, Morgan Hill was 99.6% last year. So last year we're getting just a little bit below asking price on average. This year we're getting 2.4% delta and seeing 2% above asking price, which is at least less nuts than San Jose and the county overall. Gilroy last year was 96.7% of asking price. This year, 101.8, so just shy of that 2% over asking price point, with a 5.1% delta overall. So across the board, we are seeing homes selling for above asking price. These are the numbers for February. This is not when we expect these numbers to be at their highest. We don't expect these to be at their peak. We shouldn't be seeing the peak in this number for a couple of more months, right? It shouldn't be till May, June that we start to see this peak where that competition level rises to the point where people are pressured into paying or find it reasonable to offer this much above asking price. So we'll see how that goes, but I wouldn't expect this to go down from here. And we're going to see this in a minute on the sort of looking over our shoulder chart, but these numbers being so high this early in the year are a little bit nuts, frankly. All right, next, let's take a look at days on market. This is how long it's taking homes to get sold, and we've sort of slouched back into what I like to call defined days on market. We'll get into that in a second. So last year it was 34 days to get a home sold in Santa Clara County on average. It's a 38% drop down to 21 days now. 32 days last year in San Jose, it's a 41% drop now to 19 days. In Morgan Hill, 53 days last year, 25 days this year, 53% drop. 58% drop in Gilroy, 62 days last year, 26 days now, which again just sort of highlights the attractiveness of Gilroy in this particular market. Now, if you've got, again, questions about any of this, feel free to ask them in the comments. Happy to address anything you might want to ask. But this is another indicator of where we're seeing the most action. And just that drop in Gilroy, I think, really says a lot about the amount of attention that's happening in Gilroy right now. All right, now let's go ahead and take a look over our shoulder to figure out what are the trends. And as we figure these out, we're trying to figure out where we've been, where we are, and then try to figure out where we're going with this. So let's take a look at first at total active listings. And the red bar represents the same month in past years so that we can see what was the trend leading up to it and what was the trend after it. And we can see that in February of 2024, obviously we had a jump from December to January to February. Not the same thing last year. Look at last year. We had a peak in January with a downturn in February. Now, interest rates were crazy a year ago. Interest rates had gone up in March of 2022 and had a steady increase right up until the end of the year that carried on into 2023 and that we're still kind of messing with today. But if we look back in February of 2022, we can see that the same trend that we saw then seems to be playing out now. And I think that's a more realistic place to focus in terms of figuring out where things might be going. The reason for that is, again, last year, weird stuff happening in 2023. The shock of interest rates, I think, has waned a bit. Folks are now more comfortable with a 6 point something or a 7 point something interest rate. So I think the trend we saw last year in 2022, 2 years ago, is more like what we've seen now. In fact, it's almost identical, right? I mean, obviously the numbers were just overall a little bit lower, but if we're just focusing on trend, the 2021 to 2022 trend in February, I think, is very, very similar. And I think we'll see the same thing. I think in terms of total number of active listings, we'll see an increase from here. Now, we can see between January and February, that increase slowed a little bit where it didn't slow in 2022. It just continued right on up. So a little bit more of a subtle increase. I think that's reflective of sort of listing concerns on the part of sellers, but also perhaps not as many buyers. We'll see. I'm not sure that is a valid assumption, but I would say that it at least links closely with the number of sellers that aren't coming onto the marketplace. Next, if we look at new listings, so these are the number of homes that got listed, we can see, that's the green line, that from January to February, we saw a pretty good jump. We saw a pretty good jump from January to February in 2023, and we saw a big jump between January and February of 2022. So all on par, right? And even if we consider the craziness of last year and the slightly more normal 2022, what we would expect to see is tons of new listings coming on the market and seeing a peak potentially in March. We saw that happen in May in 2023. We saw the peak in March of 2022. The 2023 timeframe, I don't know if I would take as the typical peak. But we may see more sustained listings as we get into the year. So it may not just be seeing a peak in March. It may be seeing a peak in March, April timeframe. So we'll see how that plays out. But my expectation would be from here that we see continuing increases in the total number of homes listed. Total number of homes sold is next. We can see that between January and February of this year, we saw an increase. January and February of last year, we saw an increase. January and February of the year before, we saw an increase. And then from there, in both years, we saw continued increases in total number of homes sold. I would totally expect that to happen again this year. We saw the peak in number of homes sold in April, which is a little, if you look at decades-long data, right, not just the 2 years we're looking at here, normally this number of homes sold number peaks later in the year. Because look at where the trough was in 2022. The trough was in June, July, which is kind of nuts in terms of the total number of homes sold. We saw in June, July of 2023, relatively flat performance. We peaked in the whole May, June timeframe and then dropped pretty substantially in July and then went up a little bit more in August. But normally you don't see as big of a drop in the summer months as we did in 2022. But again, remember, March 2022 is when those interest rates went nuts. So I think that was what depressed a lot of those numbers moving into the rest of the year. Next, if we look at pending, and this, again, is our crystal ball number. This is the number that gives us some feeling for where are we going to see numbers in the following month. And we can see that between January and February, pretty big jump in the total number of pending listings. Same thing happened between January and February of 2023. Same thing happened between January and February of 2022. In fact, to a dramatic degree in 2022. I would expect the exact same thing to happen. Continuing increases in the number of homes pending. I think from here, we just see activity increasing for the next few months. So these numbers all make sense, and they all jive with sort of the ground truth experience that I can bring to the table after doing this for about 30 plus years. All right, next, let's take a look at average list price versus average sales price. And again, this is against original list price. So this very much reflects what were expectations of sellers versus what did they get. And we can see where deviations occur. And we are in a month of deviation, right? Between January and February, we saw a decrease in the average sales price, but an increase in the average list price from month to month, right? So while expectations were going one direction, up, actual reality went down a little bit. What did we see last year? Well, last year, we saw between January and February the same sort of thing. A decrease in average sales price, an increase in expectations. Now, remember, there is a little bit of a month offset here, right? Because if we're looking at what the sales price was, that represents what folks accepted as an offer in the month before. So that would have been what was accepted in a January timeframe. So there's a little bit of fudging to do there, but if we're just trying to figure out trends, these are good numbers to check. Interestingly, take a look at what happened in February of 2022, where average list price and average sales price were actually pretty close to each other. And in fact, up until the craziness of 2022 in the first quarter with interest rates, we actually saw sales prices outstripping expectations in terms of list price by a pretty good chunk of change there. And then we lost that all through really July of 2022 on into April of 2023, April and May, and then they sort of merged in August, September, and October, and then departed from one another again, where list price was still higher than sales price. Next, let's take a look at percent of asking price, and this has remained strong. I know I've already done my mea culpa for this one. I expected these numbers to be below 100% in winter of 2023, and that just did not happen. The last time we saw numbers below 100% was in August, September, October, November, December of 2022. We saw sort of a big revamp of those or recovery of those up above 100%, and haven't been there since February of 2023. We haven't been below 100 since 2023 or February of last year. Look at that jump in February of 2024. If anything, that speaks to the amount of demand that we've got for homes, because you're not going to get 6% above asking price unless you are in a market where there's tons of offers coming in on individual properties. This doesn't reflect one home, one offer. This reflects one home, multiple offers. And at 6% over, that indicates 8 to 10 at least offers on some of these properties. So that's a very strong indicator. And the last time, check it out, the last time we had a number at 106 or north of 106 was in June of 2022. So it's been a while since we've been this high. And remember, June of 2022 was, let's see, March, April, May, June. So about 4 months after we started to see interest rates go up. So it's kind of an amazing number. And look at where the peak was in March of 2022 at 115.3%. It would not surprise me. I mean, if we look at where these numbers are now, it's crazy to see where they could go, because we've seen where they've been. And I think that from here, we just see them going up, just because that's typically what happens. If you look at February of last year, they just kept going up until they started to sort of peak out in June, July. So what's my anticipation here? Higher. It's just going to go up. All right, next on the hit parade. This is days on market. Of course this is down, right? Look at that dramatic drop from January. Now, why did days on market jump so much in January? It's because so many homes sold off. We had old inventory that sold off in December, and then the days on market number gets registered when it sells and the month that it actually closes escrow. So that's why we tend to see at the beginning of the year, in January, February, we start to see usually some kind of a jump in the total number of homes that sell. We saw it last year in January, where we sort of peaked in days on market. It's because there's an off sell of the homes that stuck on the market for longer than usual because of winter, right? And look at the dramatic downturn here. This is, compared to last year, this is much more of a steep and early drop. Between January and February of last year, we did see a drop, but not as dramatic as we did this year. January and February of 2022, again, we saw a drop, but it was very much on par with what we saw in 2023. This was a dramatic drop. So there was a huge surge in demand that really brought people to the table that got homes that were selling, that were listed, selling much faster because there was so much demand for these homes. Next, let's go ahead and take a look at price reductions. Now, these are price reductions compared to last month. So last month, no change in Santa Clara County overall. We had 11% of homes that were listed have a price reduction. Same this month, but from the year-over-year change, it's a 31% drop. So 31% fewer homes had a price reduction. San Jose, 12% last month, 13% this month, and it's a 15% drop from the same time last year. Morgan Hill, it was a 3% drop last month, 4% number of reduced prices this month. Total of an 85% drop in reductions from the same time last year. That Morgan Hill has one of the most evolving markets in the markets that we have here in Santa Clara County, simply because demand has gone nuts. So this number reflects just less of a need to reduce the price of your home in order to get an offer. And Morgan Hill is just seeing crazy low numbers. And I double check these numbers because sometimes they're so outrageous. I'm like, that doesn't make any sense. Now, Gilroy has gone up from 20% to 22% with a 0% change from the same time last year. So Gilroy is reducing, on average, the same amount of homes, the same number of active homes as they were a year ago. Interesting, right? That two communities that are so relatively close, Morgan Hill, no dramatic need to reduce prices. Homes are selling. They're selling robustly. Gilroy, sellers are finding that to get their homes sold, they're having to do price reductions. So that's all super interesting stuff. Now that kind of covers everything from for the overall numbers that we check here. If you've got any questions about any of those, I see I've got we're kind of peeking out here with a few more people. I'm not sure where everybody is. I just have a summary number that tells me everybody, so I don't know who's on Facebook or who's on YouTube or LinkedIn or Twitter. But I've got a pretty good number here, folks. If you're listening, feel free to reach out to me. I'm guessing I'll see, I don't think I'll see, if you comment on Twitter, I for sure won't see you. If you comment on LinkedIn, I'm not sure I will see your comment. I know I'll see it if it's YouTube or it's Facebook, but I won't see it on those other platforms. So I apologize if you're asking questions on those other platforms and I'm not responding. That's why I'm not seeing it. Okay, so let's go ahead and jump in here. If we have any questions about what we've already talked about, I'd be happy to cover that. Next, we're going to do some of the just sort of the news items and big things. Obviously, with a California focus, try to keep it, and then maybe with a national comparison between what we saw locally and what we're seeing nationally versus locally. But let's go ahead and do this. And I'm going to do the shameless plug here for a second. Now, for those of you who are watching on Facebook, I believe there's a link right there associated with the stream that you can check out. Now, this is my webpage, soldbyrobert.com, and I wanted to share it because there's two tools here that if you're someone who owns a home and you have no interest in selling your home at all, I would still suggest that you check out the What's Your Home Worth tool, because while it will tell you what your home is worth, the other tools it provides in terms of understanding how much equity you have in the home, what you can do with that equity, giving you options, giving you real world numbers. It has a link to a local lender that I work with, and it is a great opportunity for you to explore options. So feel free to check that out. Again, completely free. There is a limited number of people who I can have on there as subscribers. I'm nowhere near that limit yet, so I don't want you to think I'm trying to pressure you into get in now while you can. But it's a great tool. I use it for my house just because it plugs me into so many different things that I can do. Maybe one of these days I'll do a tour of this, but feel free to check it out. And then, of course, there's the search tool. So you can start your search and just check out whatever you like. And it's a great way to start your home search if you're ready to start that going. And it lets me interact with you while you're searching so I can get a good feel for what kind of homes you're interested in. All right, let's go ahead and jump in and take a look at some of these news items. Now, as I mentioned before, I wanted to do a little bit of a national comparison here. Median listing prices are down 0.6%. Well, we can see that listing prices are not down at all. Our market compared to the national market is very, very different, where the smallest increase in list prices was, let's see, or well, hold on, list prices. Let me look at where's list prices. So very different, 0.6% drop. We had a 7.5% drop in the original list price in the county and a 10.4% drop in Gilroy, but a 0.5% increase in San Jose and an 11.3% increase in Morgan Hill. So county-wise, and remember, this is not a direct apples to apples comparison. I'm not a big fan of median listing prices. A median is simply the number at which half of the homes were above this number and half of them were below this number. Mine is an actual average where you just take the total number of homes that are listed, take all their prices, and then divide, and you get what the average is. So take that for what it's worth. I think the average is a little bit more useful than the median. Total number of new listings up 15.8%. For us, that is a super low number. The county had 38%, so more than double that number. San Jose had 41% increase, 28% in Morgan Hill, and 32% overall. So, and the time on market, 2 days faster. I think we're way faster than that right now. So just sort of to give you a rundown on where these numbers are hovering. Next, mortgage rates fall second week in a row to 6.74. So I've got a little website we can all look at and see what real ground truth numbers are if you're trying to get a loan in San Jose. And I've done a check. If you use San Jose as your location, Morgan Hill as your location, it doesn't matter. It gives you the same numbers. But it's currently at 6.74 according to this article that came out on March 14th. Let's go ahead and just jump to that. So here's where we are. This is Mortgage News Daily, where we're actually a little bit above 7.09%, right in the middle of the 52-week range. 52 weeks in this 52-week range of time. Our lowest was 6.16. Our highest was 8.03. And if we wanted to do a loan right here, and I put in San Jose, but I also tried it with Morgan Hill. I did it with Los Gatos. I did it with Sunnyvale. Same loan options come up. Take a look at what you get. Now you can get below 7%, but look at how much you're gonna have to pay in fees. $10,400 in fees for that loan to get a 6.847 APR. 7.012 with a 60-day lock, which is very nice, and fees of only $1,350. But man, and then what's amazing is the low number of options that you get, right? This is only showing 2. Obviously, there's going to be, you can go to credit unions, you can go to more places. These are just ones that happen to participate in this tool that helps you find loans. But in the past, this list has been much longer. So I think that's an interesting indicator. And I think a lot of it also has to do, if we do something under $1 million, see, we get the same too. So sometimes what I like to do is just to see at what point are different banks saying they don't want to participate. See, this is a different lender. But we're still seeing just really limited, right? If we go up to 3.4, is anybody lending? Nah, see, none of these guys want to lend at that point. So anyway, it's just an interesting one, I think, to check out. Let's go back here. Where were we? All right, so let's talk a little bit about some of the things that I was alluding to. And for those of you who weren't here in the pre-show, we were talking a little bit about taxes, California, things that are going on. This is something I wanted to throw out there because it's absolutely been true anecdotally for people I am talking to. It is true for me personally, because these folks did some research onto how much do tax policies affect migration. The consensus in the academic literature is that high-income individuals are very sensitive to tax increases both internationally and within countries. In tax year 2021, taxpayers with adjusted gross income of $200,000 or above, which is only 7% of tax returns, generated $1.5 trillion in federal income tax payments, constituting 68% of total federal income tax collections, according to the most recent IRS data. Taxpayers with adjusted gross income of $1 million or above, 0.5% of tax returns, paid $824 billion, 37% of total federal income tax receipts. So I like to stay plugged into this kind of stuff simply because I think with what's happening in California and what's about to happen in California, this is critical stuff. So one of the most striking findings in the paper is that the states that introduced the income tax in the post-war period lost more than 16% of their population within 20 to 30 years. So obviously this is very long-term sort of research. In other words, out-migration in the long run outweighed fiscal capacity gains when new state income taxes were introduced. So in other words, the point here is you tend to lose more than you've gained through the tax increase in terms of lost revenue from people who've relocated. When considering new sources of revenue, lawmakers need to think beyond the short-term logic of taxation and account for the long-term implications of increased tax burdens, especially in an increasingly mobile economy. Recent evidence from the academic literature suggests that the link between state income taxes and decisions regarding where to live and work may indeed be strong. And in every conversation I have with folks who are leaving, when I try to figure out, well, what are your goals? What are you trying to achieve? What are the things that concern you most? I like to try to pin these things down, particularly if there's a way I can make the overall transaction fit better into their concerns, right? One of my goals is to have as worry-free a transaction for my clients as possible. So I typically have these conversations. Why are you moving? And today, and again, this is a change. 15 years ago, this was not the answer I would get. 20 years ago, this is not the answer I would get. Today, the answer is, I'm concerned about policies I'm seeing coming out of Sacramento. I'm concerned about the direction California is going, and I don't want to be on the hook for whatever craziness comes out in the coming years. So, in the spirit of that, now let me also say I did a much more deeper dive in last week's podcast. If you want to check out that podcast, you can find it on my website, soldbyrobert.com. You can obviously also find it on iTunes, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Google, whatever their thing is, Amazon, everything. So it's out there. So feel free to check it out. Just do a search on Real Estate Realities with the Rebel Broker. That's the name of the podcast. So this is just to give you sort of the 10,000 foot view on this one. We went from having a $100 billion surplus in the state to having a $73 billion deficit. It started off when I first reported this in my podcast over a year ago. We were talking about the $30 billion deficit, and it just keeps getting bigger and bigger. And if anyone thinks that this number is going to stay 73 billion, you haven't been paying attention to California politics long enough. This number will go higher. And particularly when you think about what's happening, where the thought process is going in terms of what are the political class in California doing in response to this. Proposition 1, this is likely to pass. And the reason why I bring this one up is because it's a $6.4 billion deficit increase. They want to borrow the money for this. And my argument would be, what does this tell us about the tendency of politicians in California when faced with a problem that needs to be solved and a budget decision to be made? The decision that comes down is not, let's cut elsewhere. Let's refocus, let's reprioritize and focus on what needs to be handled. It's let's spend more money, right? I actually saw that on, I wonder if I screen capped that, on Twitter today. I came across an interesting post that showed how much deficits have increased since Clinton. And regardless of what party you're in, it never goes down. Right? It starts off flat and slow, and then at some point suddenly we're racking up trillions of dollars of deficit spending. But this is the thing, right? This is the solution to a problem that we have that's absolutely a real problem that needs attention is not, we already get a ton of money coming into the state. Let's figure out where to make cuts to fund this. It is, how do we spend more money to make this happen? So and the reason I share this is it's a mindset question. If you're faced with a financial problem, what do you do? Do you go into deeper debt or do you rebudget, right? That brings us to this. Now, obviously, this is a little biased. This is from the Reform California website, but it really just runs down what's going on here. There are 2 more bills coming up in this year, in November of 2024, that absolutely, I think, telegraph what California politicians plan to do as it relates to solving financial problems. One is ACA 1 and the other is ACA 13. Now, ACA 1 would, Prop 13 has a vote requirement for new taxes to be a 2/3 majority. This is to reduce it to 55%. So in other words, new taxes would now only need a 55% approval in order to get passed. No doubt that will be abused to high heaven. The next is ACA 13 would gut Prop 13 by blocking the California Taxpayer Protection Initiative and eliminating the requirement that voters be allowed to vote on tax increases with honest ballot titles. So everything here is, and there was also part of one of these is giving more taxation freedom to special zones. You can define a special zones to counties and to cities, in addition to the state taxes. So you as an unfortunate homeowner could have a home, let's say you have a home in San Jose in the county of Santa Clara, and you have had your home put into a special zone. You could now be levied with 3 separate taxes from the city, county, and special zone that you have to pay. This is something I brought up a couple of years ago, where homeowners in California need to be worried because the absolute first target is going to be homeowners in terms of they want to be able to levy more taxes. Let's see. What the California Taxpayer Protection Initiative does requires a public vote on all state tax hikes, no exceptions, like what happened with the recent gas and car tax hikes. It requires that tax hikes achieve a 2/3 voter approval to pass, not a simple majority. Repeals dozens of costly tax hikes that were imposed any time after January 2022. Ends the ability of politicians to put deceptive titles on the ballot that fail to disclose a measure contains a hidden tax hike. Tightens the definition of a tax to eliminate the ability of politicians to call something a mere fee to avoid voter approval. Prohibits state politicians from raising your electric and gas utilities through illegal taxes and fees, which is obviously something else we're facing here in California. So when things like this float around, I don't think it is a stretch to figure out what the plan is. The plan is not to take a serious look at how can we make cuts in the current budget, because they already have enough money coming in. We should absolutely put a line in the sand that says you are getting enough money from us now. If you can't prioritize what the state should be doing and spend accordingly, you guys are the ones that are messed up. And the bottom line is, at this point, you shouldn't trust any politician. I don't care what side of the aisle they're on. As soon as someone becomes a politician, we should inherently distrust what they're going to do, because every law that gets passed will eventually be abused. And some of these are written with the intent of being abused. And I think these two definitely fit the bill. ACA 1 and ACA 13 are custom tailored to be able to gut tax protections that Californians have been able to enjoy, at least to some degree, since Prop 13 was passed in the 70s. So just a warning. I mean, educate yourself. Go out there and check it out. You don't have to take my word for it. Look more into these things. Again, my podcast covers some interesting topics relating to this from a couple, I think it's either last week or the week before. I don't think I did a show last week. I think I was too busy to do a show last week. So I think it's the week before last. But again, you can find that on all the usual outlets, plus my website, soldbyrobert.com. Next, I thought I'd throw out there this one. This is an interesting. ATTOM is a great source for data. They do all kinds of number crunching. And I thought it was interesting that not a single one of these best single-family rental growth markets by county was in California, or even, I don't even think any of them, well, I guess Hidalgo, Texas is. That's the only one that's west of the Mississippi. We've got Florida represented a couple of times. We've got Texas represented a couple of times. We have Indian River, Florida, St. Louis City, Missouri, Cameron, Texas, Monroe, New York, Richmond, Georgia, Hidalgo, Texas, Collier, Florida, Montgomery, Alabama, Jefferson, Alabama, and Wayne M. Is that cut off? I'm guessing it's cut off, right? All right. Next, we already talked about these two, and I think that's it. I think we have covered everything. Let's see here. This was sort of what I was talking about in terms of Morgan Hill in the last 7 days. New listings 10 just in the last 7 days. I think we're seeing a big jump in the number of listings for the month of March. Price lists increased 2, decreased 2, contingent 1, pending 5, changed to sold 4, 3 listings canceled. But I think some very interesting numbers here that are sort of telegraphing what we're going to see in March. And I think it all brings home the predictions that we were talking about during the review of the February data, that's likely what we're going to see. So I hope that has been useful for everybody. If you don't have any questions or topics that you'd like to bring up, I guess we can wrap it there. I've got a full day. Who knows? I may see some of you out there. I've got some properties to look at, and I have a meeting with a client later this afternoon to, again, have another conversation about whether or not they want to get their home sold or when they want to get it sold. So thanks for spending your valuable time with me. As always, the goal is to leave you with more knowledge on the table than I take up in your time, and I absolutely hope we've achieved that this time around. Thanks again for coming, and I look forward to seeing you next month for the April Coffee and Real Estate Live Chat on the third Saturday. Thanks again for joining me. Have a good day.